Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us. We're real excited about having this time with you to share some of what unity prayer is all about. My name is Reverend Linda Martella Whitsett. I proudly serve the Unity Prayer Ministry, also known as Silent Unity, as Vice President here at Unity World Headquarters.
I serve as a manager with the Unity Prayer Ministry with Silent Unity. And I've been with Silent Unity for about 8 years, starting as a prayer associate. And I'm very happy to serve as a manager now.
So, we want to talk about unity prayer. For those of you who are familiar with unity, you know that unity prayer is pretty unique in terms of the way we pray, what we emphasize, what's important about prayer. And for those of you unfamiliar with us, we're just going to give you a quick briefing about that before we explain some of the action of unity prayer, some of the flow of prayer and what it's all about. I'm going to begin by explaining what Charles Fillmore, one of the co-founders of Unity, had to say about the meaning of prayer. Fillmore said, "Prayer is the most highly accelerated mind action known. It is an affirmation of truth that eternally exists, but which has not yet come into consciousness. In other words, it hasn't come into our awareness. He says it comes into consciousness not by supplication, but by affirmation. Our form of prayer is called affirmative prayer for this reason, that it is about affirming truth, as Charles Fillmore said. So it's pretty unique as a method of prayer. We're not beseeching, we're not asking for things. What we're doing in prayer is literally healing our lives by remembering the truth of what is true about us. And what is true about us is that we are one with God. And so we identify something of the nature and power of God that we can recognize and that we can then internalize and utilize in life. And so it's called a healing because healing is about realizing the truth of our true nature, our being, which is spiritual. So this purpose of prayer is to identify and therefore then to recognize that we are able now to be able to move forward with spiritual maturity, to be able to change the way we have been thinking and behaving in our circumstances in order to foster a shift in the experience itself, to be able to heal the circumstances ourselves. So think of it this way. This is how we're teaching it nowadays, is that affirmative prayer is a flow. It's a set of movements. And when you think about it, when you're starting prayer, for most of us anyway, the beginning of prayer is some sort of tension. In a sense, we've got a prayer need, which sort of is like a tension if you think about it. It's a constricted energy. And if you can see my fist here balled up, another way to think about this is the way I think about it is this motion of a fisted hand, it looks almost embryonic, does it not? It looks like it's potential. And that's really how we think about it. When I have a prayer need, I have a potential that I could open to and begin to realize. And so the prayer flows from that start, which is what's on my mind, what's in my heart, what is my need right now that I want to pray about. And where we're going to go is to begin by opening to truth. And so Tracy and I are going to take turns explaining each of the movements in this flow of prayer for you.
And as Reverend Linda shared, we begin by opening. The first movement, which sets the foundation for the rest of our prayer process, is to open. I open. And as Reverend Linda stated, there we begin with a tension between what is our prayer need and how is that need fulfilled. And so many times we begin with a vision in our head of what the outcome is that we have in mind. But when we open, we release that vision of an outcome. We release that specific desire And we open to the unlimited potentials and possibilities of the power of God that is the truth of who we are. And so that first movement of affirmative prayer is to establish our readiness, our openness, and our willingness to entertain new possibilities, new options, new outcomes that we may not have thought of, we may not have realized, things that may even have seemed impossible to us, things that we may not have imagined, and to be ready to receive those new visions and new understandings. And so, our willingness to open to something new is what creates the space for our consciousness to shift and to move from a place of tension, of need, and of wanting to a place of being relaxed and open and ready to receive whatever possibility comes forward. And we can open and we can trust because we are divine, because we are one with God. And whatever possibility unfolds for us, our divinity allows us to fulfill that and to move into that with ease. And so our first movement of prayer starts with, I open to new possibility. And so we quiet our minds, we open our hearts, and we choose to allow ourselves the possibility of a new perspective, something new, something different that we may not have considered, something that is grounded in spiritual principle and that is part of our infinite potential. And so we open to what is possible. We pause and open our hearts, and we become still and allow that new understanding to fully sink in.
Well, I can feel that opening, and if you're with us, you're entering into really a prayer experience along with us as we explain it. You can really feel potentially the value for yourself of, thinking about what's going on in your own life and then applying this as a prayer experience. So once we open, we want to then recognize the divine. I mean, that's where we say, let's go to God, right? When we think about prayer. So we want to recognize something about God, about the nature of the divine that would be really useful for us to know about in the particulars of our circumstances, that which we're praying about right now, right? So what we think about is naming the divine principles that we're seeking to realign with and to activate in our lives. It's this simple. What I recognize that God is, that is something that's going to lead me to be able to recognize that in myself as well. I don't want to get ahead of us, but the first part of that is recognizing the nature of God. Now we could say, I am one with God, or God, God is all that is. I only know God. That way of generalizing the thought about God, it's just that it's hard to know what does that mean. And so to be specific about naming a particular principle that we equate with God, simple principle, love. Love is the principle. And who couldn't say God is love? So that's what we're talking about. Think about what you know is God is, and then being able to specify that. So God is any of the 12 powers. God is omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. God is the fullness of joy and peace. So you know where we're going here. So any divine principle that seems to be lacking or that you believe could be useful for you to know more about when you think about your prayer need, that's what you recognize as the nature of God in this moment. And it becomes so useful, as you'll see as we proceed in prayer. So some examples, for example, would be, I recognize divine peace in this moment. I recognize peace is that which passes all understanding. It's available and accessible. It's unchanging and ever constant. I recognize peace is the very fabric of all that is. Or I might recognize divine wisdom. I might say, I recognize that there is only one power and one presence, and right now I know it is wisdom. The deep, intuitive, innate knowledge that is present in the seeds that are blooming, in the birds taking flight, and it is available to me, and it is my nature available within me right here and now. I recognize is the second movement in prayer.
And after we recognize, we integrate. And what that means is simply whatever the divine principle is, the spiritual principle that we identified in the second movement, we claim that and embrace that as part of our identity, as the truth of who we are. And so when we talk about divine peace, we claim peace as our nature. We know and understand that we have the capacity, the ability to be peaceful, and we call that forth. As we recognize divine peace, we integrate and embrace our divine identity, which is peace, and we could say to ourselves and remind ourselves, I am peace. And there may be a little bit of work here for us to do, because sometimes that divine principle doesn't look like what we have seen, what we have expressed, what we have experienced in our life. And so it can call us to release what we have known in our humanness and to embrace the spiritual identity, the spiritual principle of peace, of wisdom, of life. We know that God is life. And so we can integrate ourselves with that principle of life and claim that as part of our identity, regardless of what may be happening in our bodies, in our minds, in our spirits. We can stand on that principle and claim it as our true identity. And so we joyfully claim that identity. We know that we are one with the universe. We know that all that God is, every principle, every characteristic is who we are. And we release our human conditioning, our subconscious that tells us that we're not, and we claim that truth. And you may have to be bold about it. You may have to be bold about it and just, say to yourself, this is who I am, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of what I've experienced, regardless of what my parents may say, or my coworkers or may say, or others may have told me. This is who I am. And this is who I'm going to stand up and be. And so we claim it, we embrace it, we integrate it. And as we move through the steps of prayer, we put it to work. We put it to work.
Mm. Tracy, I love what you're saying here, and I really want to just re-emphasize that, the unity teachings, that the prime teaching that we have is the prime principle of oneness.
Mhm.
And it says there's only one power, and that power is God power, and that we are one with that power. And so if there's only God power, how could we be outside of that? We have to be included in that. And so if it's a stretch, if it feels really strange to be able to say this, remember, we're only claiming that one aspect of the nature of God that we need, that we really need to be able to know and internalize in this particular prayer situation. We're not saying I am all of God, I'm everything, because that's not what we're really after. We're after being able to claim one aspect of that infinite nature, one that's going to be very helpful to us. And so from that claim, from that, so here's what we've done just to bring you along with us. We've opened a space for possibility. We've opened to a greater truth, so to speak. We've recognized a needed spiritual principle. We've recognized the nature of God that is a principle. And then we've integrated this spiritual principle with our own divine identity. Well, now we're ready to step into what we call realization. And this is a greater, deeper understanding of what becomes possible when I know this. You know, in a sense, we've said, God is this principle, therefore I am that principle in nature, the truth of me. And so, therefore, what can I do differently? What can I bring about? How can I hold my thoughts? How do I live? What habits of behavior do I maybe change in order to conform to that principle? This is the part of prayer we call realization. It's actualization of this idea of integration, right? In New Thought, answered prayer is often referred to as a demonstration, meaning that we demonstrate or we embody a divine principle. We bring it into manifestation in our life and in our experience. Well, this is all the state of spiritual realization, that we know what we can have, what we can know to do, what we can be, what we could what we could change in our day-to-day living habits. This is all the way it works. Myrtle Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, said this is our method of prayer: acknowledging our oneness with God, claiming the ability that it gives to us, and then expecting to have what we need and what is conducive to our spiritual progress. So that's what this unfolding set of movements of prayer allows us to get to, you know? And so one way we might think about this is that when we're caught in a strictly human experience or perspective, we can't see that potential. But when we expand, when we've opened and we've come into greater awareness, now we have a larger awareness, and we can claim that truth for ourselves, and we can see the usefulness of it for our life. We can change now. Myrtle Fillmore did this with her own healing, where she said, I realized that I need to express my emotions in a more helpful way instead of stuffing them. She said, I could change the way I've been eating and drinking, my habits. I can pay attention to what feels healthful in my body and what doesn't. Simple things like that become possible in this state of realization. So then we conclude prayer. Tracy will describe that.
Mhm. And so the next, the final step, which is almost a natural outflow of when you have opened to the possibilities, to new possibilities and potentialities, and when you um, uh, identify the spiritual principle that applies to your need, to your situation, and you claim that and you embrace that, and then you realize that you have the power to do something with it, then the natural response to that is gratitude, is to be grateful and to appreciate that the power is in your hands to make the changes that you desire in your life. And so our prayer process closes with appreciation. I appreciate. And this is where we express our gratitude and our thankfulness for this new realization, this new understanding of truth. We are grateful for how our thinking and how our consciousness, our awareness has shifted from that tension of being stuck with a sense of need to a realization of, I can do something about this myself, and I have the power to do this. And we can incorporate all of this going forward we are grateful because we can see that the path forward has been laid for us and that we have a sense of direction. We are open and can be aware of what is ours to do. And we are appreciating what has taken place in our heart, our mind, and our spirit in this process of prayer. Not waiting for something to change down the road or ahead of us, not waiting for something to be different tomorrow or the next day or next month, but being grateful for what has happened just in this process of prayer, how we have been changed and transformed. And that is the beauty of prayer. Not that it can change our outside situation, which it can, but that it changes us within, which is what this prayer process does. And so, with affirmative prayer, with the steps of this process, we appreciate the fulfillment in the present moment and the transformation that we experience. So, we appreciate our new understanding. We appreciate all that we have realized and all that we now know that we are capable of being and doing. We are grateful to see the truth of the situation. We're no longer trapped in our humanness and the limited vision of possibilities. And we are grateful that we now know how to show up as our divine potential, fully realized, expressed in this moment as peace, as healing, as wisdom, and as love.
So, what we've just stepped through, we consider the five movements of Unity's affirmative prayer as they can be explained in 21st century language. Those of you who studied Unity, you might have heard them as Unity's five steps of prayer, but we wanted to apply vocabulary that describes the activity of that part of prayer. And so we've reclassified them. So just to reiterate what those five movements are, it starts with I open, I open. And then we go from there to I recognize. I recognize the divine. I recognize specifically a divine principle. Then I integrate my human and divine awareness. So I integrate that I am that very principle in truth. Going from there, I realize something of what I could do to utilize and to express and demonstrate that principle in this circumstance. And then I appreciate the shift in my awareness, the truth that sets me free, the newfound knowledge of what I can do and how empowered I am. So, this is the prayer experience. And we are going to embark upon an experience of these movements with you so that you have a chance to really pray along with us in this process. But beforehand, I thought you might find it valuable if we just gave you a couple of examples of how this could be utilized. So what I'm going to focus on is the core of prayer, which is the second, third, and fourth of those movements. God is, or, right, I recognize God is, then therefore I am, that's the integration, and therefore I can, and that is the realization in prayer. All right, so here's a simple example. It's one that's pretty common. I'm worried about my loved one who's been hospitalized and is in the ICU. I can be aware of like what human feelings and what kind of where I might stand as a human being in that situation, right? But when I enter the prayer process and I open to greater truth, I'm leaning into my spiritual nature. So I begin by recognizing that God is, or the principle that I need to know is divine life. That's one possibility. I can really choose any principle that I relate to that makes sense at that time. But for me right now, I would say it's the principle of life, divine life, which is the irrepressible flow, the vitality, and the vigor evident within each form of life, within life itself, even in the formless. And so when I want to integrate that principle, I begin to recognize that I am one with, and I can now therefore rightfully claim the principle of life. I claim that I and my loved one is the very flow of life. The vitality of life is evident in her presence right now. And because that is true, I can now do something with that knowledge. I can focus my mind on my loved one's life, the fullness of her life that is evident right now in all the functions of her body that are doing their part for her recovery. I can think about her wholeness, the truth of her whole life that is so much more than this one set of diagnoses or symptoms, right? Instead of obsessing over what appears wrong, I focus on her whole life. I also can speak to her of all that she loves about life, emphasizing her wholeness and having her turn her mind also to life. And I can also know that life is not about her body or about her human existence only, but that life is ever present. It's continuous with no beginning and no end. So you notice in this prayer process, we didn't promise a specific outcome. We didn't jump to a conclusion that of course she's going to get out of that bed. That's not the point of prayer. The point of prayer is to heal our own thoughts of insufficiency about when we think about our loved one in the hospital bed. We can feel helpless. We can feel like, oh my gosh, worried about what if she doesn't survive. And we turn our minds instead to what is really true, even right now. And divine life is a beautiful focus for that. I hope you could feel that. A second example is about a job. I lost my job and I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. Now, whether or not you were ever in that situation, you can probably imagine the tension that is experienced in that state of being. It's a scary time in life, a time of great unknown and worry about being able to live well. So when we enter the prayer process and we're going to open to a greater truth, we can begin by recognizing, just as one possibility, I recognize that God is, or the principle is, divine strength, which is the power of stability, courage, and tenacity. Really strong powers, right? And so then I go in, after I recognize that principle and think about what it means, now I claim that I am one with. I now claim the principle of strength. This strength enables me to stand steady and stable in the midst of shifting emotions and even the day-to-day conditions, right? I am also courageous in spiritual strength, able to act in my own best interests. And strength's tenacity is mine. And that means that I can be persistent and enduring throughout this period as I look to the fulfillment of my intention to have that next job that allows me to pay all of my bills. And so what's the realization then? Well, there's a lot of things that I can now do knowing that spiritual strength is mine. I can keep my thoughts focused on the possibilities ahead, steadfast in knowing the truth of abundance. I can courageously pursue the job of my dreams, not worry that I have to just settle and take any job that's available. I can move with courage, and I can persist through the daily ups and downs, without having a setback set me back. You know what I mean? I mean, this is tenacity. It's the ability to envision and then follow through on my highest intentions for my next employment. And I can also stay in a state of appreciation of the blessings that I experience throughout my day so that I'm grounded in the idea of abundance, of a world of plenty, right? So these are just some of the ways that we can use the prayer process to get us into a state of greater consciousness of possibility and be ready for a great demonstration. All right. So I think there's one more. Should I just give this last example? I think it might help.
Mhm.
Many times we're involved in periods of stress or strain in relationships, right? So maybe I want to improve my relationship with my sweetheart, my parent, my child, or my friend. And so again, when I enter into prayer and open from that state of want or desire or need, I can turn my recognition to God as love, as the principle of love. And remember that love is a principle, it's not just a good feeling, right? So, love is a magnetizing power, the harmonizing force, and the unifying nature of love. And I can then claim in the state of integration that I am one with, and I now claim that principle of divine love. I can be, therefore, an embodiment of love. And I can know that I and my loved one are magnetized to each other. We have the business of love between us, And I'm able to harmonize my thoughts. This is what I can do now in the state of realization. I can harmonize my thoughts when I think about that relationship. And I can know myself as one with that beloved. And I can insist on knowing the truth that we are integrally, eternally one in love. And I can remain willing to stay connected in our shared experience and to not distance myself. These are all things that are human possibilities, but they become our spiritual capacities when we identify ourselves as that principle, in this case of love. All right, so we're going to go through an experience of this prayer process for you and with you. We're going to enter prayer together. And as we do that, we're going to invite you to take a moment now and consider, what is your personal prayer need in this moment? What would you say is your most important intention right now that you're going to bring into prayer? And let's begin. Let's enter the field of prayer together.
And so we move into prayer together. And we begin by relaxing our bodies. I relax my body and open my mind to the truth that I have been seeking. I open my heart to the glory of the light within me. I'm in a state of expectancy. I'm ready to know a truth that I can claim and realize and embody. I am more than my humanness, more than what others say or think about me, more than what I may say or think about myself. And so as I breathe deeply, I release all of those limiting thoughts. I direct my brain and my nervous system to be still, to be at peace. And I become willing to be open, to learn, to expand, to evolve, to grow, to have and to be more. I am open. I am open.
I open now to the power of God, and I turn my thoughts to begin to recognize a spiritual principle that I need to know right now. I look for and choose a word that describes God in terms of a particular power or principle. And I recognize that God is the source of this power in my life. Myrtle Fillmore said, God is neither male nor female, but principle. Not cold-hearted principle like mathematics, but the principle of life, of love, of intelligence. So think about the principles that you know. The principle of strength, the principle of joy or abundance, principle of order, of faith, of wisdom. And ask yourself, what do I need God to be right now? And let me express that as a noun rather than a verb, right? Let me express it as a spiritual principle, a state of being rather than an action, right? A beingness rather than a doing of something. So instead of loving, God is loving, I would say God is love itself, the principle itself. Take a moment now and choose one principle. You can't go wrong. Any principle that comes to mind is the principle for you right here in this moment. I recognize God is. I recognize the spiritual principle is.
God is, and I am. I integrate. I embrace. I claim. I stand on. I cling to. I embody the principle that speaks to me in this situation, in this need. I think about the reality of my oneness with God and with the spiritual principle, with the power of God. And so I come into agreement with my divine identity, my divine identity, my divine power, my spiritual capacity for wisdom, for life, for guidance, for strength, for joy, for peace. I may even be able to look back over my life and realize that there are times and situations when I have expressed wisdom, I have demonstrated strength, I have embodied life and peace. And so these truly are mine. This is truly who I am. In my humanity, I am divine. And I can claim and stand on these powers. This power in this situation for this need is who I am. And I claim it. All of it. I claim it.
Because God is, and therefore I am, it naturally follows that I am able. That I am able to be, to do, to have, to bring about positive transformation. So I begin to imagine my next thoughts, words, and actions arising from spiritual realization. Knowing that this power or principle is mine, how will I use it today? What might I think or do or say today? What might I bring about in my actions? Because God is and I am. What I can be and do, what I can have and bring about, what I can emphasize and devote my time and attention to, these are all what happens in the state of realization. So I know that what I choose to be, what I choose will be for the purpose of demonstrating and embodying spiritual authority, spiritual power in this situation, and being in integrity with my divine identity, realizing that if I am one, and in that state of oneness, I am able. I am truly able. I can realize, not just in my thoughts, but in the way that I proceed from this moment forward.
And I am grateful. I appreciate. I celebrate God and my Godness. I celebrate my true nature that is not powerless, but is powerful. I celebrate that my humanity is not the total of who I am, because I am divine. I celebrate and I appreciate that I have the spiritual power, the spiritual capacity to move forward to the good that I desire. I know the truth. I'm aware. I am open. I see the possibilities. I claim my power and my strength. And I know, I realize the steps that I can take, that I will take to bring forth good in my life. And I'm grateful. I'm thankful. I appreciate, and I have joy.
And as we conclude prayer, we say, and so it is. May it be so in our experience, and so it is.
And so it is. Amen.
Well, friends, we really hope that this has been meaningful to you and that you have maybe even a greater explanation now of the process of Unity's affirmative prayer and how it really makes a difference to you in your ability to claim the nature of God that you need for any time in your life. You know, Jesus in his demonstrations told us that we would be able to do all that he did and more. And this is really what it means, that we're able for ourselves to be able to claim and embody the spiritual principles that we bring into life, that heal, that strengthen, that up-level our experience of living and bring everyone that we care about along with us in that journey, right? So thank you. Continue to do your own daily practice, your study of the principles, because as you get to know the principles, the 12 powers, and all the different ways that God is, then you're better able to identify them for yourself and be able to claim them in your own life's circumstances.
Thank you for sharing this time with us, for participating, for lending us your attention and sharing your consciousness with us. Our hope is that this has been a blessing to you, that your prayer life has been elevated and uplifted, and that you will experience a true transformation in your life as you continue to pray.
And remember that the light of silent unity is always shining for you and with you. That we pray 24/7, 365 in this ministry. Someone is always in prayer, in silence, and interacting with you with your prayer needs. Look to silent unity in any way that is good for you, that makes sense to you, and also enrich your own prayer life through these practices. It has been our honor to share them with you. Silent Unity and Tracy and I both really just give you great blessings and appreciation.